Hello and welcome to Policy Watch, your packed snapshot of the week's biggest business stories, their context, their relevance and impact. For the first time, it appears Mint Street and North Block are marching in tandem. The Reserve Bank has reduced the repo rate by 0.25%. More importantly, it came on the heels of a union budget, this time the Union Budget 2015 exercise. The big question is, are they acting in tandem and what does that mean? More importantly, what else lies ahead after the Union Budget 2015 speech that was read out last week? To understand that a little better, I'm joined by Madan Sabnavis, Chief Economist of Care Ratings. Madan, thank you very much for joining us. So, historic in some ways that we've seen a Reserve Bank reduce repo rate almost following the cues that came from both the economic survey as well as the union budget. Is that a correct interpretation, and what does that mean if so?
No, it definitely looks like that the RBI was waiting for the budget to be announced. They were waiting to see as to what would be the borrowing program of the government, how that would have an impact on overall liquidity. And given that it's an almost neutral stance which the government has taken in terms of the borrowing program, the RBI thought that with inflation being under control, it was the right time to lower interest rates. Comes as a kind of a surprise because we were expecting it in the last policy, it didn't happen. So it looks like that the RBI would tend to surprise us by taking decisions between policies rather than on the policy day.
Right. So if you were to now link the Reserve Bank's move with the announcements and pronouncements that you saw in the budget itself, how strongly does it stand up, or does it stand up strongly enough?
See, the government has been speaking about getting back growth. So I think RBI is playing its role in terms of whatever can be done by lowering interest rates. Though to be fair to the RBI, they've always said that even if they lower interest rates today on account of a weak transmission mechanism, it would probably take 2 to 3 quarters before you can really see the impact of these interest rates, lower interest rates on growth. So we may have to wait and see as to when this would really fructify into growth. But it's just a case of saying that both of them are really working together, which is a very good sign.
Okay. Now, if I were to look at the government's own finances, I mean, let's keep the data and the inflation and all the triggers aside for a moment. How do they look as we sort of now look at the entire balance sheet of the government at the end of the budget season?
See, what we have realized in the past is that the government has tended to slip up on two accounts. See, one is that they don't tend to spend where they should be spending, and that's because of the self-imposed constraint of following the FRBM path, where towards the end of the year, when they realize they haven't garnered enough revenue, they decide to cut back on discretionary expenditure, which is basically your infrastructure spending. So I think this is one area where the government should look at, because it looks like as if they have targeted a higher fiscal deficit ratio. Instead of 3.6, they've looked at 3.9%. And roughly, if you look at this 0.3%, it translates into the incremental expenditure, which is supposedly going for infrastructure. Now, assuming that to be so, I think if they start spending this money from April onwards, that will have very good backward linkages with the rest of the economy. So that's one area which I think the government should be looking at and focus on and start working on it immediately. And the other place where they have been slipping up has been the disinvestment, because even this year we're talking of something close to around 70,000 crores, which we're targeting. And in the past, we have seen we've not managed to get more than 35,000 crores. So if I'm looking at such a big target of 70,000 crores, I need to start disinvesting right now.
Right. But of course, you also have other sources of revenue, right? The coal auctions, the spectrum auctions. And
see, the auctions, they have looked
not
at
all of it comes to the center.
Yeah, but if you look at, for example, look at the spectrum sale, they're talking of something like 40,000 crores, which may probably work out. But we should remember that most of the revenue targets are set on the basis of certain kind of growth taking place in the economy. And when that growth doesn't take place, we have a tax collection suffering. And that's when we really see kind of backlash on government's expenditure. So since this investment is something which you keep towards the end of the year, and you also decide to cut back on expenditure at this particular point of time, it finally means that we have a budget which meets the targets, but we don't really meet our objectives.
Yeah, exactly. So if I were to extend that point, so if growth, investment and jobs are one critical objective or set of objectives of a union budget and the government in general, we saw the economic survey, we saw the budget, we saw the pronouncements within it, and we see this interest rate cut. How is all of this adding up to something really tangible for the economy? No,
to begin with, I think we should not expect that a budget can actually take care of all the problems of the country. Because I always quote this quite often, saying that if it was so easy for governments to turn things around, Japan would not have been in a recession for 20 years. So the government can do only as much as it can. And I think because actually the budget is nothing else but a statement of account. So you get revenue and you spend the money. The idea is that if I'm able to spend money today and make sure that it creates the backward linkages, then I can actually start the growth process, which will also create jobs. So that's the way we should actually be looking at what the government can do. We can't expect the government to actually bring about high growth, because the government of course has the advantage that it's the only entity which borrows at a low interest rate. So today if it borrows in the market, it can get around maybe 7.5%, 8%. That would be on the higher side, whereas any private entity will have to borrow for at maybe 12, 13% for the same project which is being put up. So if the government starts this, then I think the virtuous chain will really start.
Right. So therefore, if one were to now spin forward and say what is the real unfinished agenda from a macroeconomic perspective, if we were to get all these things going, including the inflation data, which I'll come to in a moment, what would it be?
See, the agenda forward is how do I bring about my investment and how do I make sure that this investment translates into growth. So even though amounts will be small, but make sure that in small steps I'm able to achieve it and calibrate it throughout the year. That itself would reinforce the demand for private sector investment. So if we're talking of infrastructure or we're talking of any kind of PPPs taking place, it would start the moment the government does it. Clean up the administrative part which is there. The government has been doing a very good job on it, but more importantly, we want to make sure that people start taking decisions, start investing based on this more positive environment.
Okay. So what lies ahead then? I mean, you know, the idea is that if all of this is coming together, then things should start happening. Right? If no, and let me sort of add to that question. The point is that we are still, regardless of what the GDP numbers say or don't say, we are still in a low growth environment. Industry is still operating below full capacity. I was talking to a businessman today who said that he was operating at 50% of 2012 peak. I'm talking about engineering and manufacturing. So we've got some way to go, don't we?
We have way to go, but we should remember it's going to be a gradual process when we turn around here. Because today, if you see that the major problem which we have is consumer demand. Individuals are not spending, households are not spending, because even though we say that inflation has come down, if I look at my income hasn't gone up in the last 3 years, and I've actually had cumulative inflation of around 25 to 30%, my purchasing power has actually gotten eroded. So therefore, if you look at, say, growth in consumer goods, it's been in a negative territory the whole of this year, and we probably had made around 1 to 2% in the last 2 years.
Yeah.
So we need to get the households also start spending. Because I think we have the problem of demand is what is afflicting the economy today. Individuals not spending, and as you mentioned, industry is not investing because they have surplus capacity. The government is not spending because of the FRBM constraints, and therefore nobody is spending.
Right.
So if the government starts spending, it's at least one third of what we are talking of. One party could start spending.
Right.
And as inflation comes down and hopefully remains low, we could see some kind of purchasing power of individuals going up, and even households start spending.
Right. So, and that's exactly the next question. So, what is your reading of the inflation data? I mean, yes, the Reserve Bank has reacted positively by reducing rates, positive for some or many. But on the other hand, if the Reserve Bank seems to be convinced by the inflation data, are people like you?
See, actually, honestly, this kind of target which the RBI set of 6%, 4% with a band of 2% is going to be, it will be interesting to see whether they're actually able to go by this particular target, because the target could always be changed in case it turns out to be unrealistic. And I'm quite sure even the RBI is aware of it. Because if I look at it historically for the last 10 years, if I say how many years did we have inflation, a CPI inflation rate of less than 6%, it's only 2 out of 10 years. In fact, if I look at the last 8 years, we've had more than 6% in all the years. So it's a fairly aggressive target which we have set, and maybe this year things have been fortuitous because crude oil prices have come down and all the goodies have come to us, manufactured goods prices have come down. Therefore, we managed to be in this region of around 5%. I'm not quite sure if we'll be able to retain it in case things do turn around, because we've already seen crude oil prices have started moving up. Nothing really prodigious to make us worried, but prices are moving up as far as crude oil is concerned. So as and when the world economy recovers, the demand for metals will go up, and automatically we will see that manufacturing inflation will also go up. So I'm not quite sure if this 6%, if we can really stick to this 4 plus 2%, and also maintain the kind of interest rates which are really required.
And that's really the last sort of set of questions, right? So one is, when will the Aam Aadmi's purchasing power really go up, and what in all of this is leading to that? And what does the future look? I mean, without any intervention, or is intervention necessary to do? Bring about some change.
If we're talking of household spending taking place, it takes place due to exogenous factors. So your incomes have to increase, then your real income also has to increase, then households have to decide that they're going to spend money. We were expecting it every year. So if you ask me why do I expect it to happen this year, honestly I don't know. I just hope that it's going to happen. It hasn't happened for 3 years. You say, okay, in the 4th year people are going to start spending money. But
spending beyond a point. Some spending is obviously happening.
No, it's very minimal spending which is going. So today if I'm talking of deceleration in the growth of consumer goods, so obviously your sales are coming down, and therefore your production is also coming down. Nothing as what they were in 2011-12, notwithstanding the fact that your GDP number shows that the manufacturing sector has been doing reasonably well. So I think these things will take its own time, and it's only when the consumers start spending, the government starts spending, and industry realizes that they're reaching their optimum capacity utilization, that they will start investing more, in which case lower interest rates will really help. Because today we have a situation where I have lower interest rates, even if banks do pass on this lower interest rates.
You're not sure about that?
I'm not quite sure, because the transmission has always been very slow.
Yeah.
Banks are very quick in terms of deposit rates. So you and I as savers, we'll see that our deposits get affected. And normally what they do is that they tend to lower the rates for retail loans, not for corporate loans. Because corporate loans are risky. There's a greater probability of NPAs. Retail loans, mortgages are definitely safer bets.
Okay.
So therefore it's going to be a very slow kind of a revival process.
Okay. But you're saying that over time, at the end of it, things could look better for the Aam Aadmi.
Things should look better for the Aam Aadmi, again, provided the monsoon is good and we don't have any kind of shocks on the agriculture side.
And oil prices don't go shooting back up again.
And oil prices don't shoot up. They may not probably shoot up this year. If you look at the futures prices, they generally give an impression that things will be fairly steady for this year.
Right, Madan, thank you so much for that. Well, we take a break here. On the other side of Policy Watch, we're going to look at some of the unfinished agenda for the tax proposals, and more importantly, what does it mean for you from a direct tax point of view, and whether the tax administration could become simpler and more accessible. Stay with us. Hello and welcome back to Policy Watch. One of the things that came out in the Union Budget 2015 was the whole thrust on simplicity and the fact that the tax department is going to be non-adversarial. Now, there's a lot to be done, of course, once those promises are made. Let's try and understand some of the key challenges ahead for both the direct and the indirect tax proposals and the larger unfinished agenda when it comes to tax and when it comes to make your life simpler. I'm joined by Sudhir Kapadia, Head of Tax at Ernst & Young, and also Rohit Jain, Partner at ELP. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Sudhir, let me begin with you. Let's pick up some of the simple things, right? So, the Finance Minister did talk about a non-adversarial tax regime, which is something that the industry at large, tax practitioners, the individual taxpayer have been clamoring for years, right? So, now the statement has been made. What lies ahead?
Well, I think let's pick up corporate tax policy, right, in which the announcement was made by the FM right in the beginning of the speech. After a long time, we have clarity on what the medium term, the next 4 to 5 years, corporate tax policy is going to look like. So, what we are clearly being informed now is that we are looking at lowering the corporate tax rate from 30% going down up to 25%, let's say by 2019, 2020, right. But of course, with that will come the other bit, which is rationalization of various incentives, etc. I personally think it's if we are able to achieve this, it will be a game changer in terms of the direct tax administration, at least on the business side, on the corporate side. And why I say that is because, and the Revenue Secretary himself quoted these figures, 90% of domestic tax disputes today arise out of exemptions and deductions, the profit linked ones. So, if you are going to be able to eliminate those, it allows the tax administration to focus on increasing the tax base and do more quality assessments. Today, as you rightly said, the angst with businesses is that, there is no concept of quality versus quantity. Every return virtually gets audited and you get into unavoidable disputes, etc. That's one. Second, I must however mention, Govind, that even in countries which have moderate tax rates, they have taken care to protect capital allowances. Capital formation is something we should not lose sight of. So, depreciation, investment allowance, R&D. Those in my view should continue, and these ones, yes, we should look at when the sunset happens and how we go about converging the lower rate.
So, in simply put, it would mean that when companies or entrepreneurs, businessmen are investing in actual creation of assets, they should be encouraged.
That's right.
And they should not be given exemptions outside of that.
That's
so pure exemptions for asset creation, job creation
should
and
continue.
So on.
And by the way, that is what the direct tax code in the beginning had also recommended.
Right. Okay. So, Rohit, let me come to you. So, the goods and service tax has got a deadline now and a target of sorts with 15th April 2016. That's one, which means that across the country we'll start seeing uniformity in tax paying. Secondly, we've also seen an increase in service tax, right, which affects many of us, particularly when we go out, buy things, consume things and so on. So, what does this all mean? I mean, how does it, is it converging somewhere? Is this something of a concern to me, the Aam Aadmi, or should it be, is it part of a larger design like it was in the case of corporate tax?
Clearly, increase in the rate of service tax is part of a larger design. Today, services are liable to tax only at a central level, which is at union, which has been prior to the amendment was 12.36%. And now it has increased to 14, potentially may go up to 16 with the Swachh Bharat cess. Whereas in the GST, the proposed rate structure was likely to be in the range of 25% odd. And if you need to really move towards the 25% of a rate structure, the step needs to be taken to increase the rate of service tax. What will happen eventually under the GST, that it's not only the center, it's a state and center, both will be empowered to levy tax. So 12% may be rate of center and the state, it may be 14%, but eventually it is definitely likely to be higher than 14 or 16%, which is currently been payable. So clearly it's a step towards GST, but having said that, is it a right time to do that? Because today we are wanting to give some benefits. Look at Aam Aadmi, and Aam Aadmi consumes lot of services, so be it telephone, be it restaurant. And at that stage, you increase the rate of service tax. Is this the right time to do? That's the question.
So tell us, I mean, if you could illustrate that a little further. I mean, if you were to compare this with how an average citizen pays tax, including on services in other countries, versus what we are likely to pay here, how is it looking to you?
See, if you compare with the goods and services, there are differentiation in the tax rates. For the purpose of goods, average tax burden that the consumer in India incurs is in the range of 28 to 35%.
Okay.
So we have 12.5% of VAT. We have at least 12.36 prior to this amendment was excise duty, and plus we have a host of other taxes, be it entry tax or octroi or LBT is another tax.
So whether I'm buying a soap, bar of soap or a color TV, this is all that
all of them average rate of taxation in the range of 28 to 35%. Whereas when it comes to the services, it was only 12.36%. When it is compared with the internationally, the average tax rate was anywhere in the range of 20 to 24%. So clearly in terms of goods, we are more ahead in terms of the tax rates, whereas in terms of services, we are below the international standards. We need to ultimately get to a mean rate and uniformity across goods and services.
Okay, so you're saying if things were done properly or handled smoothly, my impact on goods should come down and maybe services will go up, but
right.
at the end of the day, my household sort of expenditure bill should be still okay.
Overall, a consumer will get benefited.
Okay, that's
because
the belief.
There are a lot of non-creditable taxes which have been get in the supply chain, which has impacted the cascading effect of taxes.
Right. So I'm going to come back and ask you.
Quickly add one point therefore, as he rightly says, the important thing is that in the GST design, you must have a very clean mechanism to claim input credits in the supply chain, because unless you, today there is skewness between excise and service tax, and that is why the final cost also increases.
Right.
If a business entity is able to very clearly claim the input credits for all that goes into the supply chain, then clearly the cost will also go down.
Right. Started by talking about simplicity. The other point about, as an extension of simplicity, is really the tax administration. Right. And let me come, I mean, and let me split that in in a way. So one of the things that was talked about in the budget is black money, right? And the finance minister spent some time talking about it. There seems to be a very, very strong and thrust to penalize people who don't reveal to the Reserve Bank assets they've acquired abroad or invested in abroad. So is this giving you a sense of simplicity, or is it giving you some other sense?
No, so two things here. See, one is the if you increase the tax base. So let me step back. Today, the tax GDP ratio in India, the needle is not moved. It is still somewhere 10% and a half. That's a fact. Over the years, 10, 15 years, needle has not moved.
And the absolute number of people paying taxes hasn't moved much either.
So clearly there is a need to do something about it. Two is, again, it's a very bold move to say that we are now going to come with a very comprehensive law which addresses this disclosure requirements for assets held abroad, etc. So if in that process the tax base increases, it will lead to a better tax administration for existing and honest taxpayers. There's no doubt about it, because ultimately you have to get to a certain pie of earning revenue. Today what is happening, because the tax base doesn't grow, the existing taxpayers, be it corporates, be it personal, get all the focus and attention, and unwanted many a times. So if the tax base grows, so that's one part. They will have a better administration. As you rightly said, the second part is, in anything which they bring, it should not obviously lead to harassment of genuine cases. Already they are saying we'll clarify that scholarships or foreign travel or studies, etc. we will not really. It's good to hear those clarifications, but it should be enshrined in the law itself or in the regulations. Unless it is enshrined there, the fear is that at the ground level an officer can potentially take a very technical view and say that you did not disclose this or did not disclose that.
So at the end of this, so are we, I mean, as a future, if we were to look ahead, unfinished agenda, are we looking at taxes really going up in this country?
No, so
or collections going up?
I personally think collections going, see what happens is that collections will go up not directly but indirectly, in the sense these are all deterrents. Today a FATCA in the US is a huge deterrent.
Yes.
Therefore, if this law is designed well, it will be a huge deterrent. There will be 1 or 2%, who will be thick-skinned enough to do whatever because they are prepared to go to jail.
Yeah.
But the deterrent comes that you cannot, people will think twice, 10 times before putting pen to paper. When you have a rigorous imprisonment of 10 years, that's not a...
So, my question in the larger sense is that will this whole fear, if that is the deterrent of black money...
It should lead to better compliance.
Overall.
Whether it will eliminate black money or not, I can't say. But it will lead to better compliance, therefore larger revenues and better life for the honest taxpayers.
I think they are using the carrot and stick policy. When you look at it, service tax, we have an interest rate of 30%. So they are telling SSC that you better comply, otherwise we will be 30% of a tax interest rate. Whereas they are also giving some rationalization on the penalties. That if you pay within 30 days of issuance of show cause notice, you will not be required to pay any penalty. If you pay within 30 days of the order, you only pay 15% penalty. So they are using both sort of measures.
So is that working is my question. No, of course it's working, but are people doing it in the right spirit, or is it because they're running for their lives?
Our experience suggests it does work. As soon as you see the interest rate of 30%, people are looking at more compliant regime as opposed to taking some aggressive calls.
On the indirect tax.
On the indirect tax, instead of taking aggressive calls.
Okay, what about the direct tax?
I think it will have the same impact once you have a effective anti-black money law. Why I say effective? In the domestic, you had Benami Transactions Act, it is still born. Nobody bothered about it. They have to. That is why framing the law is critical. Once you have it, also the awareness is increased, the audit trail has increased. Technology is something which is available to the department as well. I personally think that because of these deterrents, compliance will improve and therefore tax collections will improve.
Okay, so last question in a way. So if we were to take all of this and come back to the first question, which is that is tax collection and the process of tax administration going to be simpler, less adversarial? Can I pay taxes honestly without fear?
Let me put it this way. My own view is even now, even without this budget, for personal taxpayers, I would submit that life has become far simpler.
Okay.
I don't think 90% of personal taxpayers even get called for any kind of assessments. So if you look at it from where it was 10 years ago, 5 years ago, you have the central processing center in Bangalore. You have the technology where you file the returns. The refunds are directly. I get SMS saying that your refund is credited to the bank account.
Okay.
Which is a great service. So the point is, no, I'm not the only one, but the point is that on the personal tax front, there is clearly a market improvement in my view.
Right.
The issues are still surrounding the business tax or the corporate tax, and that's where I think some of these measures and the lowering of rates and the simplification of exemptions.
So unfinished, what's the 1 or 2 quick?
Unfinished agenda is clearly on business tax, corporate tax. A lot more needs to be done, both on the ground and in the law. The seeds have been sown. 5 years later. When you say
on ground, you mean administration of
administration, of course. So I would say for the finance minister 2020, he should proudly look back and say the seeds were sown in this budget. This is where we are, and that is what they should aim for.
Okay.
Clearly, in terms of the indirect taxes, lot of things to be done under GST. We still need to see the draft legislation. We need to see the place of supply, point of taxation rules, and the most important.
And when should you? I mean, if the deadline
is April 1st,
so when would you expect to see all of this?
At least in next couple of months, all of them should be out.
Okay.
And most importantly, what the companies or the SSCs are really looking at as a uniformity, so that it should not end up that each state are framing their own laws and coming out with their own rate and compliance requirements. What is critical under the GST is the uniformity. When we had VAT situation in 2005, that time when it has implemented, it got all uniformity, and thereafter again it has got diluted. So different rate structure, different compliance requirements, plus different taxes. So what really industry or the taxpayer expects, that we should have uniformity under GST and a less compliant system.
Right, and that's I guess the hallmark of any good tax system: sense of uniformity, sense of consistency, sense of complying without fear.
And less work for tax consultants.
Less work for tax consultants. Always a good note to end on. Thank you so much for joining us. Well, that's all we have time for on Policy Watch this week. We'll be back next week, same time. Thanks for watching.